Hi folks, this week you're going to be coding Evolution, which is sort of a simulation game where you can actually select cells like this anywhere on the grid system, and then you can actually make things evolve. Uh, and based on the initial pattern you have, it evolves in different ways. So actually you can also create blinkers like this and then make them evolve. Or evolve them automatically, and you can see that they crawl around. In this video, I'm going to show you how to code something very similar to evolution, not exactly the same, but it's a cat simulation. Basically, the way the cat simulation works is the page loads, and then it shows a cat in a grid system, and then you can move the cat around like this, and he moves around randomly. And you can also add mice to the grid, and the cat then will move around randomly, but then also eat mice that he sees around him in his vicinity, like so. Now I'm actually going to provide you the actual code so you can tinker with it yourself. And I'm not going to code for you on the actual video here, the HTML page, but it's just a very basic page with some styling. Um, and then to create the grid, we just create a table like this, okay? Just a table. Um, we're not creating it dynamically or anything, although you're welcome to in the assignment if you'd like, but I'm just doing it this way. Now the very first task that we're trying to accomplish is to create these doohickeys, like so that when you click on a particular cell in the grid, it'll put an M here. So how can we do that easily? Well, you could create on-click events in each little TD like this. Click equals and then in our external style sheet, we could create a toggle mouse function. And then here we could add an ID perhaps. And come back to here and document. And then run this. And it adds an M. But then of course none of this stuff works. So you could envision manually adding this way of doing things. But of course in the assignment, this is not a very efficient way of doing things, in part because your grid is going to be very large. If we go back to the grid, you can see that you have many cells, so adding them manually would be a lot of work. So I'm going to show you how you can do this, add these dynamically. So the first thing you could do is add a reference to your cell in your JavaScript. So document get element by ID. Well, and then you could add something called an add event listener method, and then you pass it the event that you want to be associated with the element, in this case a click event, and then what you want to actually have done inside, what do you want to have actually run. In this case, let's have it put an M in. So if the first parameter is the actual event, and here it's a click event, then you pass it a anonymous function. So that's a function without a name. There you go. And then we could call toggle mouse. Oops. So I know that syntax looks a little confusing there, but again, you have two parameters here. First, it's the event, and then it's an anonymous function, which is a function without a name, and then inside the function, you call the function that you actually want to run, in this case toggle mouse. So if we go back here to index and take out this onClick event, which is how we've always been doing it up to now, and then run the page again, it should run, except that we're actually getting this cannot read property out event listener, and that's happening because this is trying to execute before the actual HTML has actually run. So if we stick this script at the bottom of the page rather than the top, meaning if we call this script at the bottom of the HTML page rather than the top, it'll probably run. Let's take this and stick it at the bottom. See whether we still get that error. And now it's gone away. We have this init error, but that's just because we're calling a function that we have yet to define. So now it works. So that's the way that you create, you can add event listeners dynamically using this approach. Now we're still faced with a problem here because we don't want to add IDs to every single cell in our grid. That's just tedious as well. So we want to be able to find a dynamic way of sort of knowing, going through the cells and populating them. And the way to do that is to think of the table as effectively an array of arrays. And if we loop through that array of arrays, we can add the event listener to each of these cells. So let's get rid of this init function for the time being, for a second. That way we can also get rid of that other error. So just to go over, say, an array of arrays, and so you get a sense of what I mean by this, let's create an array here, and then put some more arrays inside of it. So A, B, C, and then another array here. AA, BB, CC. So if I want to actually, for example, access this BB element, I would go console.log and then my array, and then we can put here our first array like that. And since we're since we're referencing this second array here, instead of 0 we'd put 1, and then the element in the second array that we want is BB, so that's also 1 again. And let's make sure that's outputting what we want. Look at the console here. And of course these are look to JavaScript is thinking these are variables. We want these to be strings. Oops. And now if we run it, we get BB. So pop quiz for you. How would you access, say, CC? You would go to like that, right, CC. Or if you wanted to access, say, A, you would do 0 and then 0. And now you'll get AA, right? So that should be a refresher for you. That's an array of arrays, and we can think of this grid as an array of arrays. Like there's effectively an array of rows, and then each row has an array of cells in it. Okay. So how do we access the first part of the arrays, this array of rows? We use this particular documentation. Var rows equals so that effectively gets the rows. Notice I have here document get element by ID grid, and the table has the ID of grid, and then you just specify rows. So that brings back all the rows from the table. And then you can go, for example, rows. Let's say we're accessing that first row, and then the cells in that row, and then which is effectively an array. And let's say I want to, so this row 0 refers to this, and maybe let's do 2 here. 2 refers to 0, 1, 2, and then let's put 2 here so we can count over 0, 1, 2. This refers to this particular cell here. We can maybe change its, like make it, give it that M. And if we refresh the page, we get the M in there. So now with our add event listener knowledge, as well as the fact that we now know how to access individual cells in the table, we can put all this stuff together to actually dynamically add the event listeners to all of the cells in the table. So I'm going to keep this code around so that you can have you can see it while I'm actually building the code to add the on-click events to all the cells. So let's first define var rows just as a global variable, and then create a init function. This is the one that was getting called before, and there was no reference to it. Now we can add it back in here. So this is going to be called as soon as the page loads. And then in our init function, we can add the document this here, the rows. And then we can use this. We'll start with 0, 0. And now our add event listener code. Let's comment this out, or uncomment this. And test it. And we have a syntax error here. You can see we have 2 dots instead of just 1. Test it again. No errors now. And let's pop up an alert instead for right now. Because we're going to get rid of this code. And because I'm running this init function on the onload event, I've also gone ahead and put this script back up at the top. So we can put the script up back at the top and reference functions inside that script as long as we run it on the onload with the onload method. So now if we click on this, you can see that we get foo, and we can add more of these add event listeners. I'm going to add one more here. Say let's just add a random number and then count so we know what we're doing. 2, 3. So that's 0, 1, 2, 0, 1, 2, 3. So save it, load it. 0, 1, 2, 0, 1, 2, 3. And that works. And notice that these aren't working yet. Just for clarity's sake, this is the top, this is referring to the top corner, and let's just refer to the bottom, top left corner. Let's refer to the bottom, let's refer to this particular corner, which would be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, the fourth row, and then like so. And now if we run this, we get the alert here, and we get the alert here. Okay. If we actually now uncomment this, notice that things seem to sort of be working. If we go here, then M is put in the thing, in the first cell. But if we click here, notice that the M goes back here because it's referring to foo, to the foo ID. So we need a way of being able to signal that when we're clicking here, we want the inner HTML to update the cell that's clicked on. The way we can do that is in the toggle mouse parameter here. If we put in this, like that, that actually passes a reference of the particular element that was clicked to the method here. So we can just call this the element. And then we can take this out. And now with this, it'll, when we click M here, it works here, and then M here works like that. Now this is a kind of conceptually difficult part of JavaScript to to sort of wrap your head around. But effectively, again, what you're doing is by putting this in the parameter, you're passing a reference of the element that was, in this case, clicked to your method so that you can then access it. So this is effectively the same thing as saying document get element by ID, but you don't have to reference the ID because the information about the element is already contained in this. So I can give you another example of how this works. If we go back to our table, and let's just add 2 on-click events here. And if we pass this in the in the parameter. If we go back here and, I don't know, put in something like A and B, like so. And these are the top right. If we run this now, AB, notice that it displays BBB here. If I click here, AAA is displayed here. That's because the on-click event, when I hit it, click it, this is triggered, alert me. The reference to the actual element is passed to the function. In this case, it's the alert me function. Passes the element in, and then I can access this inner HTML that way. So we're using that same technique when we're adding the add event listeners here. So now that I've explained all that stuff, I'm going to just show you, I'm going to replace all this stuff with the initial code, which adds all the events, all the on-click events dynamically, and I'll just go through what's going on. So what we do have here is some global variables and rows, which we already saw, and I'll explain these in a second. Then we have our init function, and we're getting the reference to the rows back in it. And then I'm actually adding the cat to the actual grid in this line here. So rows, cat position 2 and 2 is this line. So if you can see cat is there. We could change cat position, say if we put 3 in here, now cat would move here. But we're interested in putting it there, okay? And then in this, after that, in the cat is position, and then we add the click events here. And basically with the click events, the core statement is this one right here, which we've already seen in the previous code I was showing you, which is a reference to each row and its particular cell and the event listeners right here. And that's being passed to the toggle mouse method, which I guess I should also add in a second. But instead of adding these one row at a time, I'm running a for loop, which is going from the beginning of the rows, right? And then there's a nested for loop inside of it going through each of all the cells. And I know how far to count up on the rows based on this max y value, which I derive from here, which is rows.length. And I know how many cells to count up based on this max x value, which I derive from this, which is rows cells.length. And I specified, the second row. I could have been anything that was in this table here. And so now everything's been added dynamically. If I click on these, notice I'm getting a reference error because the toggle mouse method that is being associated with each cell has not been added yet. So let's add that toggle mouse function. And basically what this is doing is it's passing a reference to the element in as a parameter, and then we're toggling M on or off with inner HTML. So save that. And now we can add our elements. Okay. So given that this video has already taken 25 minutes, I'm going to stop here, and then we'll continue with the second video in which I'm going to show you the code, go through the code that actually allows the cat to move around on the screen and eat the mice. So thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.